Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to host tonight's event, Artists, Curators, and Queer Curatorial Practices, Sunil Gupta, Pau, and Jason Wee. My name is Farnham. I'm the Director of Programs and Collections here at Asia Art Archive in America. AAA is Brooklyn-based, and also a mini hub of our mothership, Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong. And we also have another space in New Delhi, India. We are a nonprofit reading room, digital archive, and also a platform for research, discussion, and debate focused on recent art from and of Asia. So our reading room is open to public, and researchers are welcome to come in to browse our physical collections. And also our space is functioned as an accessing point for our vast digital material. We run around 2 to 3 public programs per month, for example, for tonight's event. And we also do workshops, public presentations, and panel conversation, as well as screenings. So for tonight, we will hear the presentations from Sunil Gupta, Pau, and Jason Wee, followed by a discussion moderated by Jeannine Tang. Jeannine Tang is an art historian teaching at the New School's Eugenie Lang College as assistant professor of modern and contemporary art. And Jeannine will introduce the schedule for tonight, as well as the bio of the speakers. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. So throughout this event tonight, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer as many as possible later tonight. And it will be around 1 to 1.5 hours for the whole event. So the event is also being recorded. If you're unable to stay for the entire conversation, we will also posting this video on our website later. So now I'd like to turn the mic to Jeannine to do the introduction. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Buren, for that lovely welcome. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeannine Tang. I'm a Singaporean person wearing a blue shirt, short dark hair, and I'm zooming in from Brooklyn, or the lands of Lenape. I'm so appreciative of the amazing artists joining us. With us already, Pau and Jason Wee, and soon to chime in will be Sunil Gupta. And I also want to express my tremendous thanks to Furen, Christina, and Jane at the Asia Art Archive in America, along with John Tate at the Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, for all the hosting, collaboration, and support leading to this panel. I'm also extremely grateful to the Civic Liberal Arts program at Eugene Lang College at the New School, and my colleagues in Visual Studies and the Arts at Lang, who supported this collaboration, and the class in Contemporary Asian Art on Queer and Trans Approaches, whose brilliant students are also here with us today. To you and my colleagues joining in, thank you all. So tonight's panel was organized to reflect diverse and even contradictory strands of queer curatorial practices by lesbian and gay artist curators from parts of Southeast and Southeast Asia since the 1980s. Tonight, we will discuss how the grain of their work has made possible challenging and experimental forms of art, how they've nurtured queer communities and emergent theory and politics. For this panel, I've chosen to spotlight artist curators who identify as lesbian, gay, and queer, and who have actively supported queer cultures, artists living queer lives, or identifying as queer. And these curators have also forged new terms for how to make art, and they've collaborated on building worlds in which the cultural achievements of people not traditionally upheld or respected as artists could be recognized and resourced, whether the artist is a woman, lesbian, gay, trans, migrant, or immigrant, a person of lower caste, or a person living with HIV. These curators have not only changed who and what kinds of artists, and by extension, whose personhood is fundamental to our societies, they've also worked across borders and against state censorship, moral policing, and trenchant nationalisms to create forums for post-colonial identities to be debated, spaces to disinter and affirm other cultural and local sovereignties, and non-normative social cultures and kinships. That's not today to say that these curators exclusively champion artists of lesbian, gay, queer, non-binary, trans, and two-spirit experience and Asian descent. They absolutely have, while also folding into their projects participants not always of Asian descent or who don't always identify as queer. Indeed, I wager many of their projects have been queer precisely because they have disrupted borders. And here I reference one of Sunil Gupta's exhibitions and books, Disrupted Borders, between putatively queer issues and purportedly heteronormative mainstreams. And they have also troubled calcified assumptions of a work of art's relation to politics of origin, national culture, and essential notions of identity. These curators have also unsettled ground locally and transnationally in the terra firma of the transnational contemporary art world we know today, as a field not only producing painting, drawing, and sculpture, but also a field in which contemporary art is queerly and deeply entangled with the live arts of theater, opera, music videos, experimental performance, along with time-based media of photography, video, and film across Super 8, VHS, and digital video formats, new media across CD-ROMs, interactive browser-based internet art, augmented and virtual reality, and through projects not only engaging the gallery and cinema, but everyday spaces of civic and public life, taking form as cafes, on the street, and in residential neighborhoods. In thinking of these artist curators and the rangy, expansive queerness of curatorial practice together, I hope we can also spend time with their workaday curatorial and organizational practices, so that we not only recognize who they were and what they represent, but also dwell with the queer methods of how they've made shows, such as Sunil Gupta's Ecstatic Antibodies and Disrupted Borders, Ellen Pau's Video Cafe and Best of Videotage series, Jason Wee's annual queer shows in response to movements to repeal sodomy laws, and spend time with how they founded and co-founded organizations such as Autograph, Videotage, Microwave, Grey Projects, so other generations might also enter into art with a greater sense of possibility. Tonight's speakers don't only do this in their individual works as artists, they've also sought to make unthinkable kinds of art practice tangible realities through independent and self-organized spaces that afford artists relief from state and market pressures and freedom to make in wayward and unexpected ways. In asking Ellen Pau, Sunil Gupta, and Jason Wee to speak tonight, I also hope to honor them and many other queer artists, curators of the Asian diaspora for their reproductive labor in regenerating artists' works and futures. They have done this by conceptualizing game-changing exhibitions and program series. They've supported new genres through running workshops, sourcing equipment, and building facilities for post-production. They've courted the press and made their own publication, hosted and cared for artists and residents. They gave artists a space of their own and platforms to show and to speak. Tonight's speakers have figured out who to involve and who to hire. They've helped edit and figured out when to back off. Their writing as curators have also given us glossaries of terms, program notes, and discourse across their exhibition vinyl, their wall text, their program notes, catalogs, and interviews. Through these actions and many more, these curators have made art possible and created context in art history, not just about artists, but art history between artists and with each other, often long before historians like myself knew where to look, how to describe, and what to know. These curators have also mentored other artists to lead, curate, and sustain generations across shows and spaces. And so to our speakers tonight, on behalf of those of us who come after you, thank you for your work and the gift of reproducing future generations of artists and a more expressive, imaginative, and unrestrained world. And so, Sunil Gupta has joined us. So I will begin perhaps by introducing you, Sunil, if that's good. And then you can speak after I introduce you. So Sunil Gupta is a British-Canadian citizen born in New Delhi in 1953, who received his MA from the Royal College of Arts and a PhD from the University of Westminster. He lives in London and has been involved with independent photography as a critical practice for many years, focusing on race, migration, and queer issues. His retrospective was shown at the Photographers Gallery in London 2021, and that moved to the Image Center in Toronto. He's a Professorial Fellow at UCA Farnham, and his latest book is We Are Here, Sexuality, Photography, and Cultural Difference, Selected Writings by Sunil Gupta from Aperture New York 2022. His work is in many private and public collections, including the Tokyo Museum of Photography, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Royal Ontario Museum, the Tate, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the MoMA. His work is represented by Hales Gallery in New York and London, Materià Gallery in Rome, Bulger Gallery in Toronto, and the Vadehra Art Gallery in New Delhi. And he is joining us from Delhi this morning at 6:30 a.m. Thank you, Sunil, so much for making it at the crack of dawn. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. I'll try and be lucid. It is a little early, and I'm down here in Chennai, actually, where it's very, very warm. And so basically, I wanted to just give a brief overview of my experience around this area. And I wonder if I can share my presentation. Let's see. Do you see that? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to show you, this one.
Thank you.
So in the mid-80s, this exhibition was organized at Camerawork in London, which was a publicly funded photography space. And Jean Fraser on the left and myself, we were very keen to have a LGBT, as we called it then, photography show. And it was a time when there was a lot of upheaval. I just come out of college in '83, and then there was, our art training had been obviously very mainstream and very straight. Nobody had mentioned gay, and so we thought it was very important that we bring the gay discourse, the LGBT discourse, up to the front. The big photo theory of the time was called difference theory. I don't know if anybody remembers that. The difference there being heterosexual. It was kind of in response to feminism, but there was no queer content. So we devised this exhibition. It was exclusively LGBT photographers, as diverse as possible, even back in '86. And we ran a schools workshop where kids in high school made photo stories on boards about coming out in their high schools, which was meant to tour the school system. So that was my first kind of initial experience of curating something exclusively gay, and immediately it kind of ran into a problem. As soon as we opened, the British government under Margaret Thatcher decided to institute some notorious clause called Clause 28, which made it illegal for our town halls and public sector bodies to fund anything that was promoting homosexuality as what they called a pretended family relationship. And they used that law to shut down our touring schools workshop. Basically, it became illegal to talk about homosexuality in the high school system. So that was our first brush with the law there. So I'm going to fast forward to India. In 2005, I came to live in Delhi, and where I found that both photography and LGBT issues needed a little push. So I got involved with a young group called Nigar that was coming out of the universities, who were using culture as a way of provoking a monthly discussion on campus. They thought they should move off campus and into the city. And we began to have monthly video screenings and performances to generate discussion, and these parties to raise money. This grew into a festival that happened every year. The festival showed movies, again had theater readings and performances, and of course with me around it had a photography exhibition. And so the way we curated this photography exhibition, because remember there's no gay photography in this country, or there wasn't until then, was to have an open call, and then people sent in their work. And our plan was to basically show as much of it as possible. So we weren't talking about the best photography, we were talking about the most inclusive curating we could make. So we guaranteed if you sent in your pictures, we would show them. The only caveat was that I and my friend, my colleague in the curating side, decided how to group them and how big they would be. So we had quite a range of material. I'll just show you some examples of it. This is some of the group with the exhibition behind them. So it wasn't just people from India. We would always invite somebody from outside to kind of make a connection with the outside world. One of the people I invited then who were great was Zaneli Maholi from South Africa. So she sent these pictures of work she'd made in Soweto at the time. So we had these up as well. She was just part of our communal kind of exhibition. It's interesting how she's become such a big person now. So yeah, so this was a very interesting experiment. There's a set of pictures, try to make something out of a bunch of pictures, none of which were like really great on their own, but together they made sense. And so slowly over time, you know, what's happened, what I really, I didn't realize at the start of this, at the beginning, it was just about, we've got to get some queer Indian imagery shown, is that after 5 years of this, we now have a big archive of over 500 pictures where at the outset, we had no pictures. You know, if you see what I mean, there was no history to refer to. There's no queer photo archive, let's say, in India. But by having these exhibitions, we were able to kind of generate one. And so we've saved all this. And so this becomes something for the future, if people want to go back and study it and how all this came to be and who all these people were, it's kind of possible. That's one of the reasons why I think I'm very keen in this kind of work. This is another body of work that came from the US by Hinda Schumann. Hinda, known for many years, and she's been working for many years with her and her partner about how their relationship was going. The idea of relationships is very sensitive in India, and also people are very keen to discuss it because it seems like an impossibility in a country where until recently it was A, criminal to be gay, and B, everybody here lives in a joint family system. It seems virtually impossible to move out with a same-sex partner, you know, and have some kind of romantic love relationship. So people were interested to see these. And then finally there was, by 2008, Pride started to happen in the city. So of course that generated pictures. So I think I'm gonna end there. Now, how do I stop sharing? There we are. Yeah. So I've worked as a curator for quite a long time, and it's been wherever possible, I try to have some queer element, and in our situation here in India, it's very essential that we have imagery, whether it's photography or video, for our queer audiences here. I just gave a talk last night at the Indian Institute of Technology, which is like an MIT, to their queer group, and the kids were so excited to see photographs of other brown queers on the screen. I can't tell you. It may sound a bit odd in 2023, but there's still a shortage. You know, they see white people and sometimes black people, but they never see other brown people, or certainly not from Asia. So yeah, I leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Sunil. There's a lot there, and I'm excited to ask you more questions about your talk later on in our larger Q&A and conversation with Ellen and Jason. So thank you very much, Sunil. And now I'm going to introduce Ellen Pau up next. And as I'm introducing Ellen and through the talks, I also want to encourage folks to drop in any questions they might have into the Q&A, and we can get to them later in a group conversation. And so I'm super excited to have with us here today Ellen Pau, who is trained in radiography and works in a public hospital. Ellen has made art between her shifts and her free time, and her video works have been exhibited in Cantopop concerts and at major arts festivals. Ellen, with her friends Wang Qifai, Mei Wong, and Ko Min Mo, started the artist collective Videotage in 1986. And Microwave, an annual movie art festival in Hong Kong in 1996. In 2001, she represented Hong Kong at the Venice Biennial, and her speculative autobiographical works are often the outcome of her studies on image science and Hong Kong culture. Ellen is also a lesbian and living with her partner in Hong Kong and joining us from Hong Kong at 8:30 in the morning, and she has COVID. So thank you so much, Ellen, for taking the time to speak with us. Sick and
well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry my voice is so hoarse. I have already drank a lot of water, but so we can actually, I have a very short presentation about my work in the past. I think we can go to the slide first. Yeah, I'm in Hong Kong, and I started this group, Videotage, as Jeannine has already said, in 1986, Videotage, with three other friends. So four of us is a very small group. We don't have an office, and we try to set annual screening of video, like video art, video short films video, and it's very difficult to get any video from the city or from our friends. And so our annual screening becomes like biannual screening, and sometimes like the annual screening we would only have like 1 program or 2 programs. So it will be quite a few people, only quite a few people doing video art at the moment, at that moment. So we still very enjoy making video, and we continue the the annual screening program from 1986 to 1990. And through these years, we have most of our like off annual screening activities is in SUNY Icosahedron, which is a avant-garde theater group in Hong Kong. I think they started in 1983, so slightly, or maybe 82, like slightly older than Videotage. Their artistic director, Danny Yong, is very supportive to us, and we are able to use their space for our annual screening and also to have our meetings. And so slowly we have, Hong Kong Fund is only government or official funding for artists, which is called the Arts Development Council. And when they started, we got the funding from them. And so we are able to have some equipment for the artists, or for the artists we know, to make to edit their video in a non-linear way. So that is very important for us. I think we can go to the next slide. Sorry. Yeah, this is Video Touch Now, which is in Cattle Depot. Now we have this space in 2000, I think 2001, I think. And then we stay there. It's a cattle depot originally. Now we turn it into like an artist village. Of course, there is this is a space where the government lists the space as the heritage site, because the cattle depot originally was built in like 1903 or 19 something. So it was like 100-year heritage in the cattle depot. And the government moved us to this place from a beautiful place in North Point. It's called Oil Street. Now Oil Street has turned into another artist space by the government now. So next slide. So 96, so we have already received a few years funding from the government, and we start to make this microwave media art festival in 96, but we start out only with video art screening. And in 97, I mean, the next year, then we add more media art elements into the festival. And continually, we make more and more media art exhibition, and it becomes a, I would say, iconic festival for media art in Hong Kong now. Okay, next slide. As I said, from early on, when we start Video Touch, we have help from SUNY icosahedron, and actually we have been collaborating with LGBT-friendly NGOs in Hong Kong since we start our group. And so these are all the, I mean, these names are all the people that have helped us or collaborate with us. And I think the most notable group that is closed now is so sad, but it's called 女同學社. It's a Mandarin translation of our Cantonese phrase. 女同學社. 女同學社 means our female classmate. And the group is called 女同學社. So it's a Mandarin translation of our Cantonese 女同學社. So sorry to explain it. The reason I want to stress on the name is because the founder, Yao Ching, a close friend of mine then, and she's a renowned writer, scholar, and filmmaker. The group sadly is closed in around 2022. The reason why I have to say is Mandarin is, I think probably most of you know that in Hong Kong we speak Mandarin, we speak Cantonese, and Mandarin is, for us, is like the language that the mainlander, I mean the Chinese people in mainland would speak. And using a name that is in Mandarin, but in English, not really written in Mandarin, but in English, is a different thing. So I guess Yao Cheng is trying to play with that, the politics between Hong Kong and China back then. I think this group was found, well, anyway, I have no knowledge of when it's found, but I mean, yeah, when it's found, I believe that the name is quite humorous, but also has a hint to this politics between the cities, between the I mean mainland and Hong Kong. One of the reasons why I would bring it up, of course, is because next slide, yes. One of the reasons, oh sorry, another slide. The next one, yes. The reason why I want to bring it up is because homosexuality was only decriminalized in 1991, which is a few years after video touch is formed, and so before that, before 1991, there are many news about like arresting gay people in the hotel, or there's a conspiracy of a gay policeman killing himself and all that. There are so many different social events that was evolved with homosexuality. And of course, we are glad that homosexuality was decriminalized in 1991, but there is still a lot of discussion about how the government would treat homosexuality people. Okay, next slide. So a year after 91, actually, I made this video called Song of the Goddess. It was said to be like one of those early lesbian videos in Hong Kong. And this video got the chance to travel to many LGBT film festivals in that year and also a few years later. Now it's treated as a classic video, lesbian video in Hong Kong. And I still remember that when I have this idea to make a video about Yam Kim Fai Bak Su Sin, which is a Cantonese opera, a famous Cantonese opera duo. And when I was making a movie about them, and also about like woman love in general, I have a discussion with Yao Ching in New York when I was doing a residency in New York, and we were talking about the decriminalization, of course, and Yao Ching was saying she would go fight for gay rights, you know, even though there is decriminalization, and we talk about like gay rights, yeah, gay rights or lesbian rights, and then we say, yeah, in this like the man dominance world, I mean, in Chinese society, the man is really the dominant person, you know, and lesbian, I mean, they would talk about gay rights, and they probably would not talk about lesbian rights because it's quite invisible. And I told Yao Ching that, yeah, because it's invisible, I think what I would like to do is to maybe make more videos to make lesbian more visible, but at the same time, I would continue my like fighting for more support to video artists and to making art in general, to speak publicly and openly in general. I think these are the driving force for me to really keep running my group, Video Touch, rather than joining Yao Qing in her path to fight for lesbian rights or LGBTQ rights. Next slide. So in 2010, we already have, Video Touch already have quite a number of different people, especially curators or artists that has been working with us. And this show was the most memorable show that we have, 2010. This live performance is by Shuli Zheng, and we fill our space with all the naked body we can find from this casting, and then with the audience also. There's actually over 200 audience trying to get in, and we have guards, like, dressed in official guards costume and standing in front of our entrance, and also at the further entrance of Cattle Depot, there's also people checking. The space is very steamy, and I guess this is also the first time where the audience have a taste of how the queer performance would be. We are quite sure that this would be only a one-night event, because we have already received a lot of not so good warning from different bodies, but I think we still would like to try the limits, and would like to see what, since we have our space, and since we got warning from our space management too, but so we try to do things on the edge, I would say. Next slide. And Shuli come back in 2016 and spoke on ISEA for the keynote. That year is called Cultural Revolution. Of course, it's referring to both the revolution that is made possible by new technology, and such as AI and all the different technology we come across, but also the cultural part. The Cultural Revolution is a name that we borrow from mainland also, where they have this history. There's in the 60s, they have this history of the class struggle, I would say. And so our relationship with China is actually getting closer after 97, since we go back to China in 97, July 1st. So we are getting closer and closer to become one of the city in China. And maybe next slide. And actually we welcome LGBTQ into our board of directors, staff, interns and volunteers, artists and curators, etc. and etc. And those people who has worked with us or who has come to us they have, they are doing also a lot of great things for Hong Kong. And next slide. So some of the people that are more well-known in the city, some of them may be working with us for quite a while. Some of them may be just a brief encounters or a brief working relationship. But they are all very dear to the LGBTQ community, like Kyle Jung, Jameson Law. I don't want to speak about each of them, but they are also now becomes the very important people in our community. Next slide. So comes to last year. There is a foundation. It's actually a global for the global LGBTQ. The foundation is called Sun Pride Foundation, and it was founded by Patrick Sun. This foundation, the main goal is to collect and present LGBTQ artworks. And they have their presentation, their exhibition in Thailand and also in Taipei. And this time, 2022, they have the third presentation, and it's in the homeland, Hong Kong. This Mythmakers Spectral Synthesis 3, so that's why it's called the third one, is opened last year in Taiwan. And this week is actually the last week of the show. Well, you can see these people that is related to Hong Kong. They are now presenting their works in the exhibition. And of course, there are other people from all over the world that the Sun Pride Foundation have collected, also are presenting other artists' work there. And it's a very well-received show, though. There is one of the work in Shuli Zheng's presentation of her Venice Biennial work was banned by the government. Of course, Shuli was not very happy about it. But I guess the community in Hong Kong did not really say anything on that particular work. I would say it's a very complex reason why people have not voiced out. I would say one of the most obvious reason is because Hong Kong have changed quite a lot after the change of law, the change of chief executive, for example. There's so many reasons why there is the voice of the people, or LGBTQ, is very diplomatic most of the time. Well, next slide. So gay games, yes, we will have gay games after so many, pointing fingers, I would say. Like 2 years ago, we can see legislator would say why Hong Kong needed to organize gay games, because we want the money, or because because we want to see some weird people like welcome in Hong Kong. And actually the legislator is saying that they don't think Hong Kong need any like queer or gay people they say, I mean, the legislator would say they are a disgrace, actually. So I would say the official support for gay games in Hong Kong is quite little. But I also have to thank gay games for still holding on to what they originally would like to do in Hong Kong, and hold on to that ideal and try to make it happen. So it will happen in next year. And Kyle Jung, as I already mentioned earlier in our notable alumni, he will help in the cultural events and all that. So we will have, I mean, on the surface, we will still have the cultural events that is going on in the city. So I think I will end it here now. Sorry, my voice is so bad, and I just hope everyone well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for speaking so clearly to the history of videotage and its many affiliations, even with that COVID-stricken voice. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm very excited to also now introduce Jason Wee, and I also invite people to put any questions that they might have to Ellen, Sunil, and Jason into the Q&A, and we can get to them later. But for now, Jason Wee, hello, is an artist and writer, and his recent projects have used a choral libretto as an invitation to consider the design of a General Assembly for the 2019 Singapore Biennial, as well as the choreographies of secrecy in public spaces, shipping lanes, and publishing presses for the first Asia Society Triennial and the 2022 Kochi Muziris Biennial. Jason's art practice searches for polyphony and powerlessness in the figurations of Asia and Southeast Asia, and his works move restlessly between art, design histories, poetry, publishing, geopolitics, sculpture, and photography. He founded and runs Gray Projects, an artist library and residency, and he's also the author of 3 poetry collections, including, and he has also received the Gaudy Boy Poetry Prize as a finalist in Short Future Now at Sternberg Press 2020. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Jason. It's a pleasure to have you. Over to you.
Hi, not at all. Thanks, Jeannine, for inviting me. I thought I would try and use the occasion to think through something that I wrote about, and it's something that it becomes something at the back of how I organize, how I think about what to do, either through Gray projects or in other activities that I do alongside my art practice. And I've been thinking about this idea of the uncommons. And I can get to that a little bit later. So a little bit about Gray. We're in Singapore's oldest public housing estate. It's currently called Tiong Bahru. It started out of basically my living room. I didn't have an art education at first. I kind of learned what I learned moving through a series of small independently run artist-run initiatives in Singapore. And that shaped my idea of what it means to respond to an art space at the scales that I was accustomed to. It shaped how I think about how artists circulate, how the things that we can do as artists, actually, apart from just putting our works up on the wall. And so a little bit about Gray. Quickly, we have, you can see here 2 gallery spaces, out of which we create exhibitions. On the left is Shibigi Rao's drawings, and on the right is one of our earlier queer shows in 2013 called No Approval. We also have a residency apartment, which we use to run residency exchanges. which allows us to bring artists from somewhere else to Singapore, and also allows us to send artists from Singapore somewhere else. And at the background of the previous slides, you've been looking at our library. The library, we open it as a kind of basically like a hangout space with books. So anyone can go to our website and book hours so that we can leave a seat for them, and then they can come and write, use our aircon, use our Wi-Fi. We don't ask them what they're working on, and they basically just sit alongside us and work. And so out of this space, we generate conversations, we've done reading groups, and we also publish. So on the right is a publication that accompanies an exhibition called Click Candy. So we've done, so when I run great projects with a small team, and when we think about kind of ways in which we can think how to create a space that is not simply for responding to other contemporary art exhibitions, but also to provide a space that is somehow has this latent potential for like a community. Like it welcomes a group of people that might not find necessarily visibility or welcome elsewhere. And so at this time, you know, when Ellen has mentioned Hong Kong has decriminalized homosexuality in 1991. India has done it in a few years back, but Singapore has only done this some months back. So the question of our visibility in public spaces and in public art programming has always been quite fraught. So we thought about creating this sort of space primarily through an annual queer project. So this is one of our first called No Approval. It's a group show. This is one of the works in it by an artist called Farrell Ong. This is in the following year, we created a solo for Mala Bandini, who's an artist actually. So in this image, Farah is in the spotlight on the right, Mala is actually on the spotlight on the left. And so we created a solo exhibition for Mala Bandini, who's a trans artist whose solo exhibition at the time was mostly in photography, but she's since moved into painting. The following year, we did a photo show called 8 Women by the artist Grace Bay. And it's a portrait. Grace has been working with artists in the neighborhood that has a long history of sex work. And sex work, especially in Singapore, the downtown of Singapore has been divided into by the colonial government into these ethnic-based neighborhoods. So you have a Chinatown, and then you have Little India, and then you have an area that might be more Malay and Arab. And so this particular area at the edge of Little India is the area that Grace had entered into. She has some training as a sociologist, and she befriended 8 of the sex workers who lived and worked there, and then took photos that were essentially self-portraits that then became the exhibition. And the year after that, we have a show by Vanessa Ban, a queer artist who was working with found images of women that have been used online as clickbait. This is the installation. But over time, we started thinking that perhaps there are other ways to provide this kind of spaces for divergence and difference in Singapore, apart from an exhibition of art objects. And so one of the things we did was that we then began to look at the conditions that shape art making, art writing, and basically just being an artist. So we created a project where we documented the a history of censorship over roughly about 25 years. We looked at we documented the incidents that happened to different parts of culture, so to performance, which includes drama and performance art, as well as dance and movement, but also to music, literary arts, and visual arts, which also then includes photography and so on. But we also documented the changes in the law that impact the production of the work. So what you see on the timeline in white would be the incidents, and then in gray would actually be the revisions to the laws that affect cultural and art production. And so we created this timeline, and then we also created an opportunity in which folks who enter the space can then also contribute if they learn of cases that we've missed out, and if they identify changes in the law that we also missed out. And over time, I began thinking about this idea of an uncommons, rather than to produce a commons that is a queer commons, for example, that's necessarily about a shared resource and that it's somehow very public, but ways to provide information that and space and even just event and a time or a moment that might be more granular, that might be smaller, and therefore maybe a little inconvenient, sometimes less visible, but maybe it actually might serve a less visible participant. So the text is from an essay that I wrote around this idea. And so while we continue to create queer projects like this one, this is FAM from our most recent programs from last year. We began thinking about ways where we can turn our space away from just mainly driven by exhibition production, but thinking about ways where the space itself and how we use the space can be continually shaped by collaborators, artists who are interested to come into the space, but to do a host of different things that are artist-led nonetheless. And so last year, you can see the two sections of the law. One that was 3778 that was left to us by the British, and then the revision that was amended by the Singapore government during the independence period. And it was finally repealed. These two sections were finally completely repealed last year. And we decided to respond with a post-repeal program. And we worked with a queer-led space called Starch. And this time you can see that our programs, this artist came in. It's ostensibly a show around photographs involving mostly Malay queer men. But it actually really became a kind of happening. It became a way in which the participants were, I'm sorry, this is not playing. But basically you can see that folks came in and the participants were almost themselves kind of part of what is being shown alongside this fashion show and performance and music. And then we created with the Bear Project and a social group in Singapore, it's queer. We created a drop-in community space with Indignation, which is a long-running queer festival in Singapore. And then with artists such as Noor and Aki Hassan, we created opportunities really just for conversations and activities. And then we also produce a library in the space, as well as reading groups. So this library really is created mostly from temporary contributions. So we asked our friends and friends of friends and folks to just drop by with sometimes books that are by queer authors, but also books that might have been queered by the readers, and then to mark out those sections, and then to contribute that to the library, a temporary queer library. And that has some precedent. In a few years before, we created a kind of cruising and a sex library. We asked folks to bring in sex positive information, and actually the space, and then we left safe sex information on pedestal, and it actually created a kind of actually we got a lot of interesting material. Like folks actually gave us a lot of books on gynecological health, for example, and then and at the same time, then also it became a kind of like slightly cruisy vibe when folks come to read, which is nice. So the idea for us is to think about how can we think about creating not just a space where queer curating can happen, but to think also away from a way to proliferate these activities even within our space. So one way is that we decided to maybe kind of think granularly how to multiply even within our space. How often can we give our space away to folks to do stuff, for example? So we've tried turning our space into a counseling space that with queer counseling, queer affirmative counselors in Singapore, for example. But the other thing that we've tried doing is to create this program called Walk, Walk, Don't Run, which is an island-wide volunteer-led walk. So so it dispersed this idea of in Singapore where art happens within a certain kind of demarcated civic or cultural district that's mostly dominated by the museums. But instead, you are asked to take to the far north or the far west and check out queer spaces and our friends and allies, including the workshops that we work with. You can see that some of them are primarily working in ceramics or metals, but it also meant that for the first time, folks actually get to see artists as they live and practice in their own homes. These are public housing. This is Lingna Studio in a public housing estate on the right, for example. And a number of the other spaces happening during that time. And we've done 2 editions of this. And you can see how the maps, this becomes also an opportunity to remap the island in a different way. So so this has also meant that other folks have taken up. So this has taken up organizing. So this is Michael Lee, an artist himself, and then he basically had offered to document the entire sequence of the 4 artworks. And then so folks could go look him up on YouTube. His channel is Walk, Run, Walk, Walk. And you can visit basically all of these studio spaces, and you can see they're in if you have an impression of Singapore as a highly urbanized skyscraper-dominated city, and then this is quite different. So this is the Jalan Bahar Clay Studios. And or you enter into a space that's much more like a ballroom. Yeah, so in this way we aggregate kind of activity without really needing to either commission or ask. So folks have been just contributing very kindly on their own, and we're thinking of ways where this could happen without us. How can we think of ways where these kind of things can be engendered, really? So I'm trying to move out of the screen. Oh, sorry. And so the counter mapping, like for us, reached a kind of funny success because when it became a meme, when there's kind of like a memification account on Instagram that a whole bunch of us follow called Singapore Museum Memes, and they thought that the spaces that we were talking about were along the Singapore River in the downtown area, but actually they're in the far north. So yes, thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Jason, the uncommons of great projects. And now I invite Ellen and Sunil to turn on their cameras as well, and we can have a group conversation. I have a couple of opening questions for everyone, but I also invite anyone attending to also drop in questions that they might have into the Q&A button. It's in the middle at the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen. So if you just add your questions there, we can get to them later on. But I was thinking that maybe one thing we could start talking about is the nature of the spaces that you've created in your projects and in the organizations you founded. Picking up, I think, a little bit from Jason talking about like an uncommons that's not just like a public space of a commons, that's a sort of free-for-all of resources for everyone, but that's something that's more targeted, granular, smaller, serving a less visible participant. And I'd love to ask you all more about like the characteristics of some of the spaces you've created in your shows around specifically their sociality, but also the learning opportunities and pedagogy that you've introduced into the spaces. Beginning with great projects, you know, some of the things you mentioned, Jason, like having an appointment system and not asking people what they're working on, you know, wanting a cruisy vibe, wanting to sort of engage with people and ideas that don't always find welcome, and finding a way to welcome that without making people feel scrutinized. I was wondering if you could say more about like how and why you want to cultivate that kind of sociality. And in a setting that's a library, you know, that's like a resource and a learning sort of setting, you know, even like say for sex materials, there's learning opportunities there. So if you could talk about how and why, I would love to hear that. With Sunil, you know, when I look back at some of your shows, there are often so many workshops that are also part of them, right? In your 1986 exhibition, for instance, on difference, I believe there was a workshop component as well. You know, there's something about like by and for brown queer representation that's pedagogical, the idea that your exhibitions build towards an archive that can be studied. I would love to hear you say more about the sociality and the pedagogy of some of the ways in which you've curated. And Ellen, you know, hearing about the sort of facilities that Videotage provides for artists, you know, I was really struck also by the history of Videotage really centering a video cafe as a place to sort of entice new video makers, but also the ways in which, you know, you as someone who really with your friends brought in a new medium to a Hong Kong context, you know, providing like technical literacy and skill and training. I would love to hear you talk about like why the cafe, like the social gathering hangout space of like the cafe cafe as a concept was so important to the sort of queer life of videotage. And on that note, on pedagogy, you know, we have like a note from someone in the Q&A about like some like typos around people's names. So in the spirit of pedagogy, I'm also just going to drop that into the group chat. But if Ellen or Jason or Sunil would like to begin by talking about like the construction of their spaces and their sociality and pedagogy, I would love to hear from you.
I can start just quickly, just by saying that I think one reason I've been thinking about the uncommons is that visibility is highly conditioned in a way that, like, even currently, even with the law repealed, there's been no discussion around changes in funding for the arts. And currently, the funding documents that artists get, if they do apply for state support, has an explicit prohibition against the funding being applied to support what they call objectionable lifestyles. And there's currently no expectation of a change in those conditions. So what you see as visible, something that I'm picking up on what Ellen has said, sometimes when you see a presentation by a queer artist that is being funded and shown, it becomes coded, it becomes polite, it becomes a little more kind of by the way, not to get to what might be the clear object of interest, right? And so then, so that's that. So how do we then produce an exhibition that doesn't require those kinds of mechanisms towards visibility? And then the second is also just thinking that there are real still issues of welcome that folks might feel in ostensibly queer spaces. You know, I remember the opening for 8 Women, that when the women show up, there was a real tentativeness. For them, the idea of venturing out to another public housing estate that far from their own, and then into a space that, and they have certain impressions of how art spaces might be, right? Which meant that for them there is a class dimension to it, that they think that, you know, art's really for like the educated queers, and so it really got me thinking about ways where, okay, how do we generate spaces that are a little more granular, programs that are a little more granular, not necessarily visible to everyone, and maybe because they don't have to be, not for the audiences that we might want to serve.
Great, thank you so much, Jason.
Yeah. So shall I go?
Go for it, Sunil.
Yeah, okay. So I showed the 2 things. Basically, the first one was in the UK, it was in England. And I made a very clear choice when I graduated from art school not to go to the commercial art center of selling pictures to galleries, but to go into the public sector. And the main reason to have exhibitions was a very politically motivated, educational one, that the work is made for the people and kind of like by the people and to be seen by the people about things that matter to them. It wasn't about making money for the artist. So that was very clear. It was all driven by funding and arts funding and town hall, which is why the funding, when they cut funding to queer projects, was really a disaster for us. Then I arrived in India much later, where there is no public funding at all for the arts in general. It's all in the private sector. There's no legitimate LGBT spaces, artists, or sponsorship, nothing. You're literally starting from zero. So which is why student groups became so important. And they had learned the skills of organizing with very little and to mobilize the town. And like Singapore, you know, Jason, India also had 377, like a proper British colony. So we were fighting that. That didn't get formally repealed till 2018. And then the other issue was in India is that it's very huge and it's multilingual, and it's completely stratified by caste and by language. And so there are many obstacles to overcome. So in a way, what's been happening, that story that I'm talking about, it's very much based in Delhi. It's a capital story, I mean, a capital city story, if you can imagine. You know, it's not affecting, you know, the whole vast country. The other thing is that it's very self-consciously organized in English language, which is the language of the Indian elite. They study in English, they work in English, and they manage things in English. And it cuts out a whole lot of people who don't speak English, who, I mean, as we were saying earlier, as Jason was saying, maybe that, so when we have these shows, they're held in an art space in the center of the capital city. Half the city is a kind of, would feel awkward just to walk in the door. Doesn't matter if they're gay or not, but they just feel unwelcome in these places. So they feel like it's not for them, just by where it is. So we have a real problem with that, you know, like where to place these things in a way. So these are all issues that people here are grappling with, and there's still no sign of any funding. There seem to be like virtually no gay artists. And I think that's because artists in this country, in India, are only survive through the commercial sector. And there's no queer space in the commercial sector. I've had collectors who are gay themselves in India tell me, my work is too openly gay for them. They couldn't have it up in their house. Their wives wouldn't like it, you know, that kind of thing. So it feels like a mountain to climb yet over here. But things are underway, and there's this growing consciousness of it. And I think that these last 20 years of 25 years of the workshopping, which is why I think the workshopping is so important, has raised the consciousness of the young, because a lot of it has happened in India on campuses by a whole range of people who just come in and do these talks or short residencies. Just like me, I went into the IIT yesterday here. I talked about queer stuff, and like it, and I think it's kind of laid a groundwork of openness, and maybe in the near future things will look a little different. So yeah, the whole idea of the show needs to really reach out and affect the community is very high here, but the means are very complicated because of language and class and caste. In India, it's just so complicated, and Indians don't want to agree with each other. They're very argumentative people, you know. They won't settle on anything. So, yeah.
I appreciate hearing that, Sunil. And something that I think binds is that none of you just do traditional gallery shows. You often explore very different social programmatic formats for these kinds of challenging discussions. Were you about to speak?
Well, I should speak about Video Cafe. Yeah.
Also respond to Jason and Sunil if you feel like it.
No, I can speak about Video Cafe. We have organized at the very early on, like 1990 something, when we have screening in SUNY Icosahedron, we already have this Video Cafe format to present our videos. And usually the programming, we will just get anyone who have submitted a complete work, then we will try to show it in the space in SUNY Icosahedron. And the space only have 7 seats. So it's a very, very small space. So if all the filmmakers, or you know, if the presenter also go into the room, then almost all the space are filled up. And so we usually have like 5 or 6 people in the room. We are not full house, but I mean, because of the small space, we are able to have small discussion every time when we are screening our works in Sunyakosahedron, and sometimes the discussion can run for an hour and even longer than the original screening. And then actually we enjoy it because we have so many good comments from the audience or the other filmmakers, and we kind of, because of this close discussion that we have between filmmakers and organizer, and I myself is also the filmmaker, and then so it's very fruitful to learn from each other. And when we have our space, then we have a bigger space, and our video cafe becomes something else. Our video cafes become like a party, I would say, because more people can join, and there is like we provide drinks and some snacks, and people can just talk, and they can talk about anything, like besides the programs. They also can talk about other things, like they can organize themselves into doing something else, or it's quite free. And because the space is ours, and so we have no limits into how long they can stay. And actually, and so like, of course, filmmakers would like to know other filmmakers, but also the LGBTQ community would also like to know the other members in the community. And so it's a very, I would say, happy and cheerful place to know new people or new people in the scene. So it's actually quite a enjoyable video program.
It's great to hear. And these queer pleasures are really critical and necessary, especially in light of one of the questions that has come in through the Q&A from Andrew. I'm going to read it out here. You've all alluded to frictions with legal and institutional forms of homophobia. How does you see the ways in which your work continues to shift in response to these pressures? Maybe Ellen can start, because I think Videotage and you have sometimes taken not just the diplomatic route, but also sometimes like very bold responses.
I would not say, I cannot say anything on behalf of Videotage now, because I have left the group. And the successor also choose to, Isaac also choose to stay out of the scene at the moment. And so I don't know how to, as an individual, I would say, seeing how supportive the government to gay games, and how the censorship system has been going on, has been strictened for after the national law has launched. The freedom of speech, I would say, is being controlled, and I think, so it has to be, if you want to be bold, and I think that it would be quite meaningless just to be bold. You have to work in a way that is, that is not too sensitive, but in a way that is meaningful and impactful for the community. Actually, I appreciate the recent Myth Makers exhibition, though I also hear comments about, to present LGBT work, which is quite political but yet they are presented them in a way to be not fairy tales, but in a sugar coat, in a less confrontational way. So, so I also hear comment about that, and I think there's no right and wrong. It's just we probably have to do this kind of approach, approach at this time in Hong Kong, and that's my answer.
Thank you, Ellen, for sharing the strategic necessities of different approaches at these times. Jason and Sunil, would you like to begin?
Well, I think when there's repression and homophobia and the state takes away your funding and makes you illegal, you have no choice but to come out on the streets. So we responded in London and now in Delhi with protests. And I think historically LGBT people have contributed to the oppression by remaining invisible. I think visibility is one of our great fight back weapons. So, which is why we make the shows and the workshops, is to make more and more visibility happen. But in the first Pride in Delhi in 2008, when it was illegal to be, still 377 was in place, people were scared, to come out and demonstrate. I think only 700 people came, which is not a lot for a very populous city, but there were 2,000 media people. So in fact, it seemed like a huge thing. So yeah, it can be very strategic. So you have to plan and think how not to get arrested, but to make your point and to be seen by the media and to spread the word. Yeah. And the next time you have a little show, then even more people will then come. But the thing you don't want to do is be bullied and to then not do anything at all. That's my view.
I think we are not doing anything, but the visibility is already there. I think Hong Kong has come a long way, and we start with very few people concerned with the LGBT rights, and slowly the community have built up, and then there are more people doing different things in the communities, and it's actually flourished, and we have a lot of different LGBTQ organizations. We still have a lot. They are doing mainly social, supportive to the underprivileged mostly, and to be they are not vocal in government policy because there's no government policy. Well, I would say, we have been going backward quite a lot in the last 2 years. Since we have, the government have killed our media, have killed most of the democracy NGO or groups, and the Human Rights Watch and all that. If the human rights condition in Hong Kong has dropped in the index, that actually we witnessed it over the last 2 years. I think it's difficult to fall from a advanced society in I mean, we accept, I mean, most of the people in Hong Kong accept the LGBTQ, and we have been visible for quite a number of years. But the fall of the whole civic society is actually affecting how we can be visible now. As I said, the gay games is like a global event. It's visible, but in the legislation, there are also attacks on the gay games and attack on the LGBTQ. And it's not just attack on people in Hong Kong, it's just the values have changed. And you know, so I think it's very difficult to ask people to go put everything or their demand or their, or yeah, to go out to the street and protest. It's very difficult to do that. I think that's something that we did in the past. And it's I don't, we are still in the space to think about something that we can do. But I mean, until then, we will just keep ourselves in this mode of like connecting with people that are willing to connect to us, and perhaps making shows that is possible rather than just sending it outside, because you never know. Yeah, you never know how skillful an artist can be to go between all these like rules in their censorship. I mean, yeah, you never know. So but I mean, yeah, we keep trying, but the times is very different now.
Yeah, like Sunil, I work, you know, in Singapore, but also somewhere else. Like you know, I'm here in New York a lot, and also in Berlin. But the conditions of production here are, I mean, in quite sharp contrast as far as even visibility is concerned. You know, Alan was talking about all kinds of current restrictions in Hong Kong around a kind of visibility on the street, right? And in Singapore, like an assembly of two is considered, a gathering of two is considered an illegal assembly, can be construed as an illegal assembly. Now, I don't know of any other kind of domicile that has, or jurisdiction that has that kind of constraint on what it means to appear, right? So having said that, also Singapore has a kind of more than the other cities I've lived in. The state is really a kind of outsized presence that also likes to imagine itself as invisible and discreet. But really, through its agencies and policies, it really is the invisible author in so many ways, just by funding alone. So to Andrew's question, I feel like it's not a question of necessarily sometimes directly engaging this presence in the room, but I think of it as a kind of like a sidestep tango. You know, if this presence takes one step towards me, how can I take one step sideways rather than one step forward or one step backwards? You know, so how can I move sideways alongside this thing? And so, you know, and thinking, what if if I'm sideways and at an angle enough, perhaps, you know, I will miss this presence entirely, you know, or this presence will just grace me rather than completely overwhelm the way I receive someone's work or the way I make work.
I really appreciate all the responses that you're giving together, because it's never a sort of one strategy kind of approach to queer curating in any situation, you know. So I really appreciate hearing, you know, like the sort of necessity on the one hand, you know, of claiming public space, even when it's not given to you, and claiming that space in media, claiming that space in representation, claiming that space in person, but also all of these other sort of like covert, underground, sort of gray area visibility sidestep tangos that Jason and Ellen have also described, in terms of like seeking out those spaces not yet regulated by the state, or the sort of like cracks in between that shows and artists and curators can still swerve within. And I also note a comment from Beatrix that Migrant Pride in Hong Kong keeps going to celebrate in the park openly. Local queer community needs to unite with migrant and ethnic minority communities. And that comment also reminds me of like the kinds of bridge building that you've all attempted in your various projects to link queer culture and art to different groups and constituencies in your curatorial practices and programs. And so just thank you so much for all of these amazing examples and hopefulness, cautious hopefulness, that queer work and life still has a future in all of your work. I'm afraid that I do have to call this panel to a close because we're past the 1.5 hours. So thank you so much, Sunil and Ellen, for waking up so early to speak with us, even when you're tired, and Ellen, even when you're ill. I'm so grateful for that. And thank you, Jason, for joining us across several coasts. And to the Asia Art Archive in America for hosting the event, and everyone for asking these really great questions. I really appreciate the conversation. So I'm wishing you all good morning and good evening, wherever you are, as we close out the program. And I look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you very much, and take care, everybody.